what's the matter with you, stupido? I hope that wasn't offensive. It's a line that's said like 4 times in the movie. Anyways, Luca, Pixar's latest, dropped on Disney Plus, and not at a premium charge like Cruella was. So I actually watched this one. Watched it with my kiddo too, and she liked it, which is kind of impressive given that it doesn't centralize an animal. It takes a bit to hold her attention if it's, I mean, granted, these are weird, fishy, mermaidish, kind of almost sort of weird people, but maybe that was enough. But there isn't like a central dog for her to focus on, and she still liked it. I mean, there's a cat. The cat's hilarious, by the way. The cat is an absolute riot, and for the most understated reasons. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. But the cat's a side feature at most. Anyways, Pixar's latest. Between this, Toy Story 4, and Soul, I almost feel like Pixar is shifting in a direction specifically targeted at making me like them more. I've never devoted a video exclusively to this, but I've said before, I like Pixar, but I do think that overall they tend to be overrated and overpraised. And a lot of their most beloved films I think are fine, or I have actually fairly serious issues with. And the general vibe I've always gotten off their films is that they come up with themes first and then try and build a story around that, which is not an invalid way to make art, but to compare it to Disney, the Disney animation stuff, with them, I feel like they came up with a story first and then figured out what themes naturally lent themselves to that story and then reshaped the story that they already had and liked to better emphasize themes that they found in it. And that's kind of my preference. But lately, Pixar, without dropping its thematic stuff, it's losing that vibe bit by bit. And, are you guys watching my channel? No, I know that's not true. But it's just interesting because I'm at a point where I almost kind of expect to go into a Pixar movie and feel like that was good, but people are going to overpraise it. But that hasn't been happening lately. Like that said, this didn't... I don't want to make it seem like Luca blew me away. It didn't. And actually, there's some stuff towards the tail end. It's a little clumsy. I'll talk about that later. But what I mean is, it didn't have any of the stuff that normally, if I'm going to critique or complain about a Pixar film, these are usually the things I'll pick on. That stuff isn't here. As far as this film specifically goes, well, first of all, the look is really unique. The design on the face, especially the mouth movement, actually reminded me a heck of a lot more of stop animation. Something like Aardman Studios. Something about I was really focusing on the mouths for some reason. Something about the mouths and the way the teeth are designed. I'm like, that's the way you design stop motion mouths. And the way they moved seemed just a touch less fluid, deliberately, intentionally so. And it's also really interesting seeing characters this stylized that then exist in such a real looking and feeling world. That should clash. It really should. But I think part of the reason it doesn't is that a lot of the beauty of this is brought out through the lighting design and the way the sun and the shadows reflect off water and the way they just hit things. It's really stunningly gorgeous, and that plays on the more stylized characters exactly like it plays on the more realistic scenes and settings. So I think that might have been the thing that kind of stitched it all together. It was like the lighting was the glue that melded these two things. So the visual presentation is gorgeous. It's a funky little story. it kind of veers early on in a way that I was like, okay, because like when you start with a premise of, I mean, mer people seems like a weird way to put it because they're not like top half human, bottom half, fish, and they operate completely differently because when they dry off, they look human. They basically turn human when they're dry and only regain their scales and their tails and their gills when they're wet. So, and there's no explanation for this. It just is. And it's established very early on and very well. So I'm like, I'm totally good to roll with that. But I don't know what else to call them other than mer people, so I'm just going to go with that. But, you start with a young mer person, Luca in this case, and he has protective parents, and he's kind of intrigued by trinkets he finds at the surface. Well, I'm like, okay, so Pixar's doing their version of the Little Mermaid. Got it. And then he runs into Alberto, who's another mer person who actually lives on an island, like on land, and they become friends. And I'm like, okay, so not the Little Mermaid. Yeah, no, definitely not. Actually, vibe-wise, I feel like this almost had more of a similarity to a Miyazaki film. I think the default, having said what the subject matter is in this, and then saying Miyazaki, people are going to think Ponyo, except Ponyo really kind of did have some big epic scale stuff and some big weirdness, which this doesn't really have. I mean, tonally, it feels a little bit more in the vein of Kiki's Delivery Service. In terms of the stakes are personal for characters, and we care, but like what we're actually watching is just people bumming around this town, this coastal town. And just watching these interactions and watching these bonds form. And it's that kind of low key that really makes me think of Miyazaki. And it is really interesting to watch because I'm used to things building to higher stakes with these. And it's just a very chill movie, which I'm here for. And I dig it. I mentioned Luca, I mentioned Alberto. They're fun. They bounce off each other really, really well. Good chemistry. Then there's Julia, who is someone who they meet a little bit later. A great addition. Again, really good group dynamic. I want to take a minute to talk about Julia's dad. Because there was... So, he's a fisherman. And he only has one arm. This gets highlighted early into his introduction because the boys notice it. And you're kind of expecting an explanation. Maybe a story about how a shark ate it or this or that. Whatever trauma caused this. The explanation is that he was born that way. And I don't know if people properly realize what a big deal that is. Because physical limitations and disability very rarely get depicted, very rarely get depicted in mainstream media at all. Very rarely get depicted well in mainstream media at all. And that Massimo is the name of this character, and he's fully capable. He knows what he's doing. He's like, it doesn't hamper him at all. He's this big, intimidating guy. You kind of immediately respect him. You get why everyone else in the town respects him. He's just got one arm, but there's no cool story behind that. He was just born that way. So it's not even taking that kind of standard thing when you introduce a character with a disability and have it tied to, this thing happened. It kind of leaves out the very large number of disabled people who have always had that. That is their normal. They didn't used to be normal and now aren't. This is their normal. And it's such a small thing, and no attention is paid to this. And it's not a plot point. It doesn't matter, really, that he only has one arm. But it's just part of who he is. And it's treated so matter-of-factly. And the fact that, like, he says, I came into the world this way. I'm like, that, it shouldn't be a big deal, but it really kind of is. And I don't mean in movie. I mean, like, in depictions. And that, I really like that. I really liked that a lot. There was also a line that I loved. There was one line. In Pixar, even when I don't totally gel with them, there's almost always one line. That'll be the one line that kind of breaks me a little bit. And this does have it. But I'm going to tease you with that, and we'll come back to it. I do want to register my complaints. Because, like I said, the overall vibe of the thing, you know, these friends meet, they get involved in sort of this local triathlon race. There's kind of a local bully character. Not much to this guy. Whatever. I mean, he's functional. He works for what story needs him to be. But as we get into the transition point from Act 2 to Act 3, sometimes referred to as the all is lost moment, the movie briefly turns into an idiot plot, which is something that only moves forward because the characters involved act like idiots. Now, like, there's a certain amount of wiggle room because, like, they're kids. It's an emotional situation that they're in. Like, I get it. It's not that what they do doesn't make sense. But the way we get into the drama of the climax and the third act is all based around two characters in rapid succession doing something just dickish and not quite so harsh that it's out of character, but like really pushing it. It's like really right up to the edge of like almost being out of character. And if it had only been one, you know, it would have been one thing. But the fact that it happens basically back to back with two of the characters, I'm like, yeah, that felt really forced. It felt very contrived. And especially because, like, you can add a third layer onto that. Those two characters back to back doing stuff that is almost, not quite, but almost out of character. And then following it up with, oh, and then this happens, so they can't stop and talk about it. And now everyone's upset and like, God's sake. Yeah, the confluence of those things made the drama going into the third act feel very contrived. The movie was able to bounce back from that. I'm happy to say, but like it did, I was a bit like, ugh. Also, there's kind of a recurring thing of Luca having daydreams, and the movie visualizes them, and I don't know why. Like, they're okay, they're kind of pretty, but they're not really any prettier than the stuff the movie's already giving us, which I said was gorgeous. And it doesn't really give us any insight into Luca. It's not usually particularly funny. Like, they're okay. I don't know. There's something about daydream sequences in an animated film that feels, unless you're making it a central part of what you're doing, it feels a little like a cheat to me. I mean, like, my suspension of disbelief is already so high. You don't need to do this. You know? I don't know. I don't know if anyone understands what I'm on about with that. Again, not bad. Hardly derailed the movie, but I was finding myself thinking, these little interludes, and like a couple of times they will sort of start and you won't realize he's daydreaming until, well, either until something happens that like, okay, that's definitely not real, or he snaps out of it and into reality. And I think maybe that's more my issue. It's the way that they were used. They felt like fake outs about half the time. Didn't care for it. So, let's talk about that one line. And I'm not really going to talk spoilers, but I am going to have to slightly contextualize this line. And if you haven't seen the movie yet, it's possible that based off the little bit of context I need to give, you'll figure out some of what's going on. Now, like, it's not a twist movie, even though, like, as I said, it turned out to not be what I thought it was going to be, which was, Little Mermaid, but a little different. It's still not super unpredictable. You can probably plot most of the beats, but all that being said, like, this is your minor spoiler warning. So, there is concern for Luca from his parents because, well, they think human beings are gonna kill him, which is not an unwarranted fear. I mean, aside from just the normal they eat fish thing, there's also the fact that, this town kind of has local legends about sea monsters, and everyone's always like out trying to hunt them and whatnot. So it's kind of justified. And so Luca's mother asked something like, how do we know he's going to be okay? And Luca's grandmother says, there are some people out there who will never accept him, but there are also some people who will, and he seems to be pretty good at finding the good ones. As both a queer person who, there are some people out there who will never accept me, but there's also some who will. Between that and being a parent and needing to trust my own kid that she can find the people who will be good for and to her. Yeah, that one hit me on multiple levels. It's not even like a super highlighted line. It's not even like the mission statement of the movie or anything. But, that got me. I also feel like the relationships, I feel like highlighting the fact that the core relationships, especially Luca and Alberto, is really, really sweet. It is such a just sweet, wonderful relationship that I feel like oftentimes is not allowed to be shown between two boys. Because, especially given that they encounter a girl, you'd think that at some point there would be romantic rivalry thing going on. Or, something to just establish them as somehow more manly. But it doesn't. It's just this wonderful, sweet, very innocent friendship, deep friendship between these two boys. Now, if people wanted to do a queer reading on that, you could. I don't think it's intended that way, but you could. I mean, as someone who's done queer readings of films where, there's a link, where those themes weren't intended in most of those cases, you could. But even if you don't, it's just such a sweet, wholesome relationship. There's no competition. There's no rivalry. They're just there to boost each other up. It's really sweet. Far from the biggest swing at the fences in as far as deep philosophical or thematic leanings go. This is not Pixar taking a big swing. This is Pixar making comfort food. And it's pretty comforting. Luca! You've seen it, what'd you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Like, share, subscribe. I have a Patreon, link in the description, which is in fact how I pay my bills. And I'm able to afford things like Disney Plus. And also food for my kid. But you don't have to do any of it. Because we take a relaxed attitude around here. So you can just come on back next time you need a break.